It has now been confirmed that Anthony Duclair is going to be out more long-term than short-term. So how does this affect the New York Islanders? We'll discuss the players and the units that will be affected the most. We've got that and a whole lot more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We've got a busy show coming up, but first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever's on your mind. You can also follow the show on X at Locked On Isles, and you can follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR, VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long, and I am live tweeting during nearly every Islanders home and road game. So join me for some instant insight and analysis, and it's always great to talk Islanders hockey with you, game time or anytime. So the news at practice on Monday was not ideal from the New York Islanders. And we get an update from Lou Lamoriello. And look, Lou typically is kind of keeping things close to the vest, but he was actually a little bit more, forthcoming with regard to the status of Anthony Duclair. So here's what, Lou Lamoriello said, that basically it would be more long-term than short-term at this point. Here's the exact quote. We won't know until the next 24 hours or so how serious it will be. It would be more long-term than short-term at this point. Certainly not season ending or anything, but the time frame, we just have to get more results from X-rays and MRIs. It's part of hockey. This gives someone else a chance to come in and do what they do best. We have the depth to do certain things, but there's no sort of frustration or anything. It's part of the game. So we now know that we're waiting on an MRI and a scan and X-rays and all the tests. And probably at some point today on Tuesday, maybe not until Wednesday, will we get a more specific outlook as to how long Anthony Duclair is going to be out of the lineup. The disappointing thing, obviously, from a New York Islanders perspective is here was the biggest acquisition of the offseason. The guy who was going to bring a little bit more juice to the top six, especially the top line. And while Anthony Duclair is certainly not an all-star type performer, he is a solid second line, first line contributor. He's a top six guy. He'll get you your 20 to 25 goals. He adds some speed. He adds some skill. And now that is taken out of the lineup. And we don't know for how long. But if what Lou Lamoriello hinted at on Monday at practice, that it's more long-term than short-term, then the question becomes, the next big question, will the New York Islanders place Duclair on LTIR? Now, if they do, he has to miss at least 10 games. And, 10 games is it's going to be a little while. He's not going to be coming back all that quickly. If you look at where 10 games puts us, he wouldn't be eligible to come back until November 12th, when the Islanders start a West road trip that will take them to Edmonton, Vancouver, Seattle, Calgary, and Detroit. That's a long 5 games in a row on the road. That would be the earliest that Duclair would be eligible to come back if the Islanders place him on LTIR. The question then also, of course, becomes, if they do place him on LTIR, it does free up a little cap space and might allow the Islanders to make a move to bring up a 13th forward and, maybe even fill out a full 23-man roster with the accumulated cap space. Now, Lou Lamoriello also said that they are going to call up somebody from Bridgeport to replace Anthony Duclair on the roster. We know it's not Matt Martin. They said there were no plans at this time to end Martin's PTO and sign him to a new contract and put him on the active roster. So it is not going to be Matty Martz at this time. Julien Gauthier cleared waivers as of 2 o'clock on Monday. So we do not know what happened. And, it's interesting because Gauthier apparently being put on waivers had nothing to do necessarily with Duclair's injury. And, it was an interesting quote from Patrick Waugh about Gauthier when asked about his play against Montreal. He said, "I thought he was okay, but Lou and I always talk, and I just expected more from him. I was not comfortable putting him at the end of the game. We wanted to win that game badly, and I was just not comfortable putting him out there, and I guess that tells you everything." So the Islanders now have one roster spot, and if they don't place Duclair on LTIR, they have a little more than $1 million, $1,005,000, 1.05, so $1,050,000 in cap space. And, whether it's Hudson Fasching or whether it's, Liam Foudy or, there are some other players who the Islanders could bring up, but it is most likely going to be one of the veteran guys down in the minors. I don't think we're going to see your Matt Maggios and your Alex Jeffries and your William Dufours. We're more likely to see Hudson Fasching, Frederick Karlstrom, Liam Foudy, guys like that who, could come up and play for a few games, not take up a lot of cap space. Now, if you go LTIR, that does open up some more space. It may clear up. Again, you might be able to fill out a full roster. We'll see, and we'll keep you up to date. Follow us on X in order to do that. But, Gauthier needs more ice time. I think that was also part of it, according to both Patrick Waugh and Lou Lamoriello. So hopefully he goes down to Bridgeport, plays, he only played in one game this year so far, 7 minutes roughly on ice, and that's it. So he'll get ice time, but it just doesn't look like he took advantage of the opportunity that went along with making the roster. And again, if you aren't getting if the coach doesn't have confidence in you to close out a game in a close game, he doesn't want you on the ice, that's a problem. And it's something the Islanders, and Gauthier need to figure out. You get the feeling he could be down in Bridgeport for a while now, depending on what happens. But who is going to be affected most by Anthony Duclair's absence? How does it change the equation for the New York Islanders? It does in several ways. We'll discuss that coming up next. We'll also preview tonight's game at home against the Detroit Red Wings. And oh yeah, a very easy Islanders birthday of the day. A guy who was considered the final piece of the puzzle for the dynasty went on to be an assistant coach, a head coach, a minor league coach, a broadcaster. He's done almost everything but sell hot dogs for the Islanders organization. Let's see if you can guess who that is. We've got all this and more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you could check out the latest stats, view live, play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Look, World Series is here. You got college football, pro football. Islander fans, check out the odds for the Islanders tonight against the Red Wings. Maybe use your expertise on the Islanders to craft the perfect bet. Again, get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com, FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So how do things change now for the New York Islanders, assuming Anthony Duclair is going to miss a significant amount of time? Obviously, the first two players that are going to be affected are Bo Horvat and Matthew Barzal. They've just lost their line mate, and they were just starting to, get more chemistry with Duclair on that top line. And Patrick Waugh indicated that Simon Holmstrom, who finished the game Saturday on that top line with Bo and Barzy, is likely to get the first shot at that spot on the top line. How long he holds it, you're talking about a guy with 2 shots on goal in 5 games, remains to be seen. Everydayers, I talked a little bit about that yesterday, but clearly, let's assume, at least for the first game or two, that it's Simon Holmstrom instead of Anthony Duclair with Bo and Barzy. You're losing, a little bit of speed maybe, but you're losing a lot of shooting ability, a little bit of passing ability, and I think more than anything, you're losing a confident player on that top line, because Anthony Duclair he's a veteran, and he has a lot more confidence in his own offensive ability right now than Simon Holmstrom does. And clearly, as a proven goal scorer, you're missing out right now on, Simon Holmstrom's career high in goals, 15 last year. At this rate, and again, 5 games is still a small sample size, but he is basically on pace to, only get about, 30 shots on goal all year long. Now, he's going to shoot more, we hope. But, maybe this is the opportunity for Holmstrom, but clearly you're losing some offensive juice on that top line. You're also obviously going to lose some juice on the power play. And the power play has been a problem this year, just not consistent. Doesn't seem, the thing that's upsetting more about the power play than anything is that they don't seem to be working toward a goal. They're not moving the puck quickly. They're not moving without the puck. They're not trying to screen the goalie. They're not trying to tire out the penalty killers who are on the ice against them. You're losing one of your bona fide power play guys. And so an already struggling power play is going to have to find a player to take that spot from Anthony Duclair and run with it and really, find a way to integrate Duclair integrate that new player into Duclair's spot in order to keep this power play going, or should I say to start it going, because again, they just don't seem to be clicking on all cylinders now. So the power play is definitely affected. Simon Holmstrom obviously is affected with this big opportunity. I think some scouts believe that Holmstrom has the skill to play top 6 minutes. Probably not ideally on the first line. He's more of a third line guy right now based on the way he plays, but here's a chance for Simon Holmstrom to prove he can play a bigger role offensively, and maybe, just maybe, playing with Bo Horvat and Matthew Barzal provides that for him. It hasn't necessarily worked in the past. We'll see if it works now. Another player who I think will have a little more pressure on him, and it's indirect, but I think Maxim Siplikov will have more pressure. Why? The Islanders brought in 2 new players this offseason who are designed to increase the offensive productivity of this team, the goal-scoring capability. One was Anthony Duclair. The other one was Max Siplikov. Well, now there is no Duclair for a while. So even though he's only played in 5 NHL games that count in his career, Siplikov now has to be the guy, the new guy, who is going to boost the offense. Now, they said that Simon Holmstrom will start off as the wing with Bo and Barzy. Knowing Patrick Waugh and the way he shuffles his lines, especially if the offense is not clicking on all cylinders, that could last a game. It could last a period or less. Or if it works, it could last indefinitely until Duclair is able to return. But I think Siplikov would be one of those guys who would have to pick up the slack on the power play, who, if Holmstrom does not fit in well on the top line, may be on the short list of guys who would get a chance after Simon Holmstrom. And I think there's just, in general, more pressure on guys like Maxim Siplikov, Brock Nelson, Kyle Palmieri, Bo Horvat, all the goal scorers and offensive-minded players. I think there's a little more pressure on them to try to step up, but Siplikov in particular, because he's the new guy, he's the only remaining guy who they signed this offseason with the hope of boosting this rather slightly below average offense. What were they, 22nd in the league a year ago? So, bottom third, but better part of the bottom third. Again, I think Siplikov gets a little more pressure on him as a result of the Duclair injury, and maybe that even falls down to guys like Anders Lee. Meanwhile, by the way, just to let you know, in practice, what they did, they had Matt Martin skating on the 4th line, admittedly as a placeholder. So this was at Monday's practice. You had Matt Martin taking a shift with Kyle McLean and with Oliver Wahlstrom. And then they moved Casey Cizikas up to the 3rd line in Simon Holmstrom's spot. So you had Pajot, Lee, and Cizikas as the 3rd line, and then you would basically have Wahlstrom, McLean, and then whoever's being called up from Bridgeport to be on that 4th line. So it will be interesting to see how that gets handled. One other area that I think will have more pressure on them as a result of Anthony Duclair's absence, and that's the goaltending. I think both Ilya Sorokin and Semyon Varlamov, whenever they're out there, are going to have to be a little bit better, because let's face it, I think the expectations are likely that the Islanders are going to score a few fewer goals than they did when when Duclair was out there on the ice. So your goalies will have a little less margin for error and a little more pressure on them to be, I'm not going to say perfect, but to not let in a soft goal, because, the Islanders were, scoring 2.5, 3 goals a game. Maybe it drops by a little bit. And if that number drops, less margin for error for your goalies. Both Varlamov and Sorokin are veterans. I think they can handle that, but I think there is a little bit more pressure on them as well, and on your defensive core to, again, be a little bit more consistent and a little bit stronger in your own zone. All right. We got more to discuss on today's show. The Red Wings are in town tonight, 7:45 Eastern Time start. We will talk about that game, preview it, plus we'll have our Islanders birthday of the day. All that still to come on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Thank you for making Locked On Islanders your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Islanders in action tonight against the Detroit Red Wings. Game on at 7:45 Eastern Time. The Red Wings, kind of an interesting team. One of those teams that, they're in the 5th year, I believe now, of the Yzer plan. Steve Yzerman, their GM. And for the last couple of years, we've heard, this is the year the Red Wings make the playoffs. Well, they haven't quite found a way to do that. They're off to a 2-3 start. Lost back-to-back games against the Rangers in a home-and-home before beating Nashville on Saturday in Nashville by a score of 5-2. Goal scoring has been a problem in 5 games. They have only 14 goals. The goals against, a little better. They're 13th right now in the league in goals allowed. Special teams have been a problem. The power play, only a 15.8% success rate. That is 22nd in the league. And the penalty kill, near the bottom. They are 30th with a 62.5% success rate on the PK. So some interesting numbers there. Cam Talbot is expected to get the start for Detroit, although we don't know for sure yet. Talbot right now 1-1. His one win was a shutout. He has started 2 games, and he has a 3.31 goals against average, a 9.07 save percentage. Dylan Larkin right now leading the team with 3 goals and 4 points. Alex DeBrincat also 4 points. Lucas Raymond 4 points. They're all assists, followed by Andrew Kopp, who has 3 goals, which ties him with Larkin for the team lead. Taking a look at the line combinations for Detroit, Dylan Larkin, Alex DeBrincat, Lucas Raymond, that is a dangerous top trio. Then you have J.D. Compher centering Vladimir Tarasenko and Patrick Kane on the second line. some experienced players there. Marco Kasper, Michael Rasmussen, and Jonathan Berggren. That's the third line. And then on the fourth line, from left to right, Joe Veleno, Andrew Kopp, and Christian Fischer. On defense, Simon Edvinsson and Moritz Seider are the top pair. Ben Sherratt and Jeff Petrie are the middle pair. Ali Mata and Eric Gustafsson, the third pair. Again, the goalies, Talbot and Lyon. Tyler Mott, by the way, right now is listed as day-to-day, and we'll see whether or not he is able to return for Detroit against the Islanders. Right now, the Red Wings at 2-3. They are in last place in the Atlantic Division, but they have a game in hand on Montreal, 2 games in hand on Buffalo, and they're only 2 points behind third place Tampa Bay. So again, it's early in the season. There is some skill here, and especially on that top line. So it will be up to the Islanders to slow them down and play smarter defense, because if they don't, boy, oh boy, will guys like Dylan Larkin and Alex DeBrincat and Lucas Raymond make you pay. We got to see what the Islanders can do here. You got home ice advantage, your first game without Anthony Duclair. Let's see if the Islanders can make a go of it and get things, extend that winning streak after beating Montreal on Saturday. Hopefully we see better play from the New York Islanders. Want to wish a very happy 75th birthday to the one and only Butch Goring. The Manitoba native, a 5th-round pick of the LA Kings way back in 1969, played 59 games for LA in 69-70, stayed with the Kings through the 79-80 season when he was dealt to the Islanders at the trade deadline. And boy, oh boy, did Butch Goring help the Islanders. A part of all 4 Stanley Cup winning teams, was dealt during the 84-85 season to the Boston Bruins, where he played half a year before retiring. Ended up coaching. He was a player assistant coach under Al Arbor for the final 4 seasons of his time on Long Island. He was a head coach for the Bruins for a couple of years in the mid to late 80s. Took the Utah and Denver Grizzlies to back-to-back IHL titles in the mid-90s when they were the Islanders' top farm club. Was coach of the Islanders in 1999, 2000, 2000, 2001. And as we all know, Butch and Brandon now part of the Islanders broadcasting team on MSG Network. Goring winning the Conn Smythe Trophy in 1980-81 as the MVP of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And we're going to talk about one of the games that was the reason why. May 17th, 1981, Game 3 of the Stanley Cup final at the old Met Center in Minnesota. Islanders already up 2-0 in this series after winning back-to-back 6-3 games at the Nassau Coliseum. And with the Islanders trailing in this game, 3-2, midway through the second period, our Islanders' birthday of the day, Butch Goring, gets a goal. Dennis Potvin and Mike Bossy with the assists on the power play. That basically made it a 3-3 game. Then Goring puts the Islanders ahead a little less than 4.5 minutes later. Clark Gillies, the only assist. But Steve Payne ties it for Minnesota. And then after Mike Bossy scores, Butch Goring completes the hat trick, his 8th goal of the playoffs. Billy Carroll and Dennis Potvin with the assist. That ends up being the game winner. An empty net goal by Brian Trottier clinches a 7-5 win for the Islanders as they end up beating Gil Martin in this game. Basically, Billy Smith, 23 saves for the win, but for Butch Goring, he had the hat trick. He was a +2, and he scored the game-winning goal. He also had 6 shots on goal, which led the Islanders. Mike Bossy had a 4-point night, 2 goals, 2 helpers, but it was Butch's hat trick that helped the Islanders get past the North Stars. Butch Goring, did he go to the toy department in any of those goals? Well, you can watch the replay of these games. It's available out there on YouTube. But Butch Goring is our Islanders' birthday of the day. Happy birthday, Butchie. Big fan and a nice guy. Always great to talk hockey with Butch Goring. All right. We will be back tomorrow, everydayers. We will discuss our key takeaways, our hero and go to the game from tonight's contest against the Red Wings. We'll have that. And hopefully another update on the status of Anthony Duclair. We'll also know which player was called up from Bridgeport, so make sure you join us for that. Until then, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and of course, let's go Islanders.